Greetings everybody, it's Jim, and today we're going to talk about this right over here. That's right, open space. Okay, so when it comes down to space games and for RPGs, a lot of the times you could almost just take your typical fantasy setting and just skin it on over the space, and most people wouldn't be the wiser who aren't aficionados of space, right? Instead of a bow and arrow, it's a laser. Instead of a sword, it's a sonic sword or a force sword. Instead of magic, it's psychic abilities. Instead of a sailing ship, it's a spaceship, and the list goes on, right? For science fiction aficionados, there is a lot more that can be done and they want to be done. So today, I'm going to be talking to you about why you should be using the Fate Space Toolkit from Evil Hat Productions. Now, the first thing I'm going to mention is there's no reason at all why you couldn't make your own space campaign using the Fate core system just by itself, okay? It's a very powerful thing. All right. People have been making space campaigns way before the advent of the Space Toolkit. All right. So why the Space Toolkit? Well, it is in the name Toolkit. Okay. You can open the box and say, okay, I need this part. I need this part. Don't need that part. Thank you for letting me consider it. And that's another thing. It's your creative juices flowing. You know, you're considering all aspects and maybe things you haven't thought of along with the things you already know you want. Okay. Now, there's also time savers in this too, and I'm going to get into one of the things that we're going to talk about is space combat. All right, if you look through my videos at all, you will know that I am a space combat game junkie. Just am, okay, unapologetically. So this is obviously going to be something I'm going to want to dive into. The thing is about the toolkit, it doesn't just give you one option for space combat, it gives you multiple, because maybe you want to do vector movement, maybe you just want to go pew 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 like in Star Wars or something like that. None of it's wrong, it's all up to you. Now, the first thing they do is ask you, to brainstorm the campaign, which makes sense for any genre of role-playing, right? But the thing is, it's very important for space because some things aren't going to mesh well and can't cross over to another idea. Otherwise, Frank Herbert's Dune, you can't write a story about that and yet do things like you would in Farscape. It's just not going to happen. Speaking of those shows, what kind of influences have caught your fancy? Do you like the ragtag bunch in Firefly? Do you want the togetherness and kind of the mixed stories of Deep Space Nine or Star Trek in general? Or do you want something dark and gritty like Blake 7? I mean, all of these things will serve as motivations and a pathway of where you're going to go. Then they're going to ask questions like, how far have we traveled? Did we just recently open the door to the universe, or have we spread out throughout galaxies? They also ask how far in time the storyline is. Is it really based off our technological doorstep like it would be for the series Black Mirror? Or are we thousands of years into the future like the series Dune? All right. Then it asks about scope. Are all the actions and storylines about the characters themselves, again, like in Black Mirror, is it personal? Or is it basically all the actions really affect the entire galaxy, universe, or whatever, like, again, Dune? Now, one thing I wish they would have expanded on is the fact that, because they try to say that it usually goes one way or the other, and I guess in my mind, I kind of disagree with that. It does say sometimes it merges, but I wish they would have focused more on that because, in my opinion, things like stories like Blade Runner, it's all cyberpunk stuff, really, and Altered Carbon. These stories seem to have a big, it's a big scope, but it starts very personal and actually ends very personal as well. That's just the way those stories go. It's like some guy gets caught up in something that seems really small, but all of a sudden it escalates and they've tripped into something they weren't aware of, and it's just going to be a big story at the end, but it's also epic. The ending is usually epic and personal at the same time. It kind of weaves that in. The toolkit also has what they call a plausibility meter. Okay, as we know, science fiction can be a pretty broad genre. I mean, some of it takes the science very seriously and others not so much, right? So it's very important to establish those boundaries of what your campaign is and what is not. Like a low plausibility campaign would be like Star Wars. It's like, hey, we know that lasers don't go pew 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 in space. You can't hear it, but we're all along for the ride here. Yeah, that's what that's like. At the same time, if you're doing a storyline like Apollo 13, you want to get the science right? So it makes sense. Now, speaking of hard science fiction, which is what high plausibility science fiction is called. I would suggest to any of you High Colonies from Columbia Games. You don't have to use the system, it's just the setting itself. It's based off of, about 200 years into the future, mankind's no more. And everybody's out in space now in these space stations because Earth is just decimated. And yeah, we've gone on Mars and maybe a few asteroids and stuff, but there's only 15 million people left, and it's almost like we're starting over. It's really good science fiction. And they also have a something called Ceres, the Yellow King Saga. This is for their first source book / adventure. Part of it is about a station, and then the other half is about pretty much a cyberpunkish adventure, which again is good on the high plausibility scale. I think you'll enjoy it. Now, Spaceship Combat, like I said, gets interesting. I mean, you can use the basics, and just treat the ship like a character, give it aspects, stunts, and what have you, and just go through the motions like it was a character in combat. But as far as interacting with having the crew involved, it goes through some different things. First off, as far as space combat goes, there's different ways to do it. You can have it all plotted out. You can have it in areas just like in regular combat, or you can have it plotted out for vector movement with your game master. There is phased space combat, so basically it almost seems like a regular game to a point where I'm just looking here, you got the piloting phase where the pilot makes some rolls, then you got the gunnery phase where they start the shooting, the encounter and detection phase, with sensors and damage control and other actions like possibly anything that might be happening in the medical bay. All right, so you go through all those 4 phases, so you make it a little bit more interesting for the characters involved rather than just focus on the ship. And they go one further with that, with the battle stations idea, where you don't focus on the ship at all. It's all about the characters. But it's kind of like Star Trek. You know what I mean? I mean, you really look at it, yeah, you see the ships going around and stuff like that, but that's just motions. It doesn't really matter too much. It's what's happening with the crew on the bridge or in engineering that matter. And you can have the entire thing happen like that. So if you're trying to do a Star Trek thing, battle stations is the way for you. Now, in addition to everything I just said, I mean, you get tools for making your own aliens, your own planets. There's a section for 5 different campaign styles in the back. I mean, like I said, you could make your own campaign using the core rules, but why should you? I mean, for the small price of about 15 to 20 bucks, you get this book, which makes your life a lot easier as well as gets your creative juices flowing. This isn't just a book. This is technology, and I hope you pick it up. That's the Space Toolkit, and I'll see you next video.